Well, I want to welcome you to our program today. We've got a very good program and a wonderful guest. His name is Trent Schaller, and he and his wife, they serve as missionaries in France. And so I want to welcome you, Trent.
Thanks.
Yeah, and good that you are here with us today. And I don't know, as I think about mission work throughout the world, and I don't know, I just, this passage comes to mind, and it's from Revelation chapter 21, verses 22 through 27. I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and the Lamb is its lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it. On no day will its gates ever be shut, for there will be no night there. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Yeah, so Trent, just tell us a little bit about where you, like for instance, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up here in Wisconsin, a dairy farmer kid, and yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, one where I was raised on Bible stories and cereal, and yeah, so yeah, that's kind of my formative background.
Yeah, so you grew up on a dairy farm.
Yeah.
A land flowing with milk and honey,
Certainly
so
the
to
milk.
speak. Yeah. Did you have any honeybees?
No.
Not really.
Not ours.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so growing up on a dairy farm, and you said you grew up in a Christian home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, like as far as growing up in a Christian home, were there some things that your family, you do as a family that would, certainly, things that would happen that, kind of help foster, nurture your faith?
Sure. Well, we went to church on a Sunday, and we would, we participated in, extracurricular activities, if you will. So it went beyond the Sunday thing for my family. I also attended Bible camp, and that was, for me, where my faith grew greatly, was every summer going to the same place and being challenged by the Word and the example set for me by older, more mature believers. Today I kind of laugh because we're talking about people who are in high school and that sort of thing, but for a young boy growing up and seeing that model, that was really really inspiring. And yeah, I can look back to that time, being a child and hearing someone say to me, "Now Trent, you go to church, you believe in God, you have Jesus in your heart, He's your Savior, but would you let Him be your Lord? Would you let Him do whatever He would do with your life?" And I remember looking at him and saying, no, there's no way I'm going to let God do that, because I didn't trust the Lord yet. I thought that, my ideas on how I was going to live my life were good enough and were probably going to please me more. And I was afraid of what God might want to do if I let Him run the show. So, yeah, it wasn't until sometime in high school that I got to see what it would be like to serve the Lord with my youth group, to see what it would be like to hear Him say, "Well done," and to just experience what it looks like to see someone hear the gospel for the first time, and what a joy it was for me to be able to share it. It was sort of through all of that, through my experience as a child growing up, going from wanting to live for me my way to wanting to live for God, and slowly but surely come to do it His way as well, not just my own way. So
that's kind of the, like you say, the scary step.
Yeah.
A lot of times we have a guarded faith and a guarded life, meaning that, God, this is what I want to do, and now you bless that. But it's safe. It's good for me, whereas as far as what I think, whereas the other way, I mean, it's just like stepping off of a cliff. Blind faith is saying, Lord, I'm willing to carry the cross, and wherever that may lead, and to say, not my will, but your will be done. And so that was, kind of a big turning point in your life when you kind of went from, in a sense, a guarded faith to saying, Lord, here I am, and
Yeah.
send me wherever it is. And that's really well, I guess it's a faith step, but it can be,
Right.
but when you think about it, it really can be kind of scary.
Well, it can be scary, and I think that's what when I realized that it was fear that was keeping me from making that decision. And we know that we're not given a spirit of fear. I had to look again and say, now, okay, Lord, if you want to do this, you'll have to be the one to calm my fears, and He did that. And now it's gone from a thing where I was maybe afraid of what He might do to me, to where I'm just excited at the freedom He's given me to follow Him. Mm-hmm. I have more freedom now that I'm following Him than I had when I thought I was running my own life.
Okay.
And so it's an interesting thing to see. I'm no longer worried about what happens next, because I know He's in control and I'm following Him. So that's the safest place I can be. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's always quite a testimony when I hear somebody that's saying, well, Lord, just here I am, send me, and just what the Lord does with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you then went off to college.
Mm-hmm.
And while you were in college, what were your subjects that you studied?
What didn't I study? I thought, because I was still in that mode of running my own life, I thought I would study to be a doctor. So I was in med school track there. And he kind of got a hold of me and said, no, Trent, this is not what I have planned for you. And I still had tried to hold on to my own plans at that time. It was when I let go of them that I didn't know what was next. So I fell back to studying dairy science. So I was studying from being a doctor to maybe being a farmer, and go into business with Dad or something. And the whole time I was very interested in computers and technology and how all the little things work, and I'd tinker with them and I'd fix them for people. And I even would post at our church a little bulletin saying, hey, I can fix your stuff, and I got some side jobs doing that. Mm-hmm. But I never considered that the Lord would want to use the things that I was interested in for ministry. It sounds silly to say now, but I never considered that the things I love to do were the things that He would have me do for His kingdom. So, yeah.
So isn't that something? Taking your gifts and, well, in a sense, a calling, a vocation almost, when you think of that, where you say, well, this is my skill, and how the Lord now is going to be able to use that skill. And, okay, so you are serving as a missionary to France.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did that come about? How did you
Wow.
feel God's call to say, here I am, a person who has studied everything from medicine to dairy science to being into technology and computers and things like that, and now really feeling that God is tugging my heart now to be a missionary. What
would that calling look like?
Yeah.
For me personally, it was always a question of, Lord, how would you use me? What is it that I'm able to do? What have you prepared me for? And then where is the need the greatest? Where can I have the most impact? How can I best be spent for your service? And when I heard about what the situation is in Europe, notably France, I said, well, is there any use for a guy like me there? And I came to find out that indeed technology is something that the ministry there was in great need of. So I said, okay, so we started looking into it. And I mean, and keep in mind, France was one of the places I had said no to. Among all the things I could imagine ever doing, I said, I'm going to stay in the U.S., I'm not going to go overseas, and certainly not a place like France. So when I first found out that, well, there are great needs overseas, I said, okay, I'll go overseas. Then they said, well, actually, the greatest need is in France right now for us. So would you go there? So I don't know. I said, all right. For me, that was enough, and certainly, to summarize the story, that's enough.
And so you're part of a mission organization, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And what's the name of that organization?
In the States, we call it CRU. Over in France, it's known as Agape France. Okay. So it's about 100 or so people in France right now, half French, and the French are the ones in charge. They're directing the whole thing, which I love, working with them and under them as well. In the States, there's a whole lot more, but the need is there, so that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. And we can hear so much about countries, and as we study their history, as far as the church goes, and so I don't know. Right away, when I think about France, well, I think of John Calvin. John Calvin, was born and grew up in France, and it was so much a part of that one branch of the Reformation. But then I also, just always just assume that, the Catholic Church is very strong in France.
Sure.
And so when I think about mission work, I always think, oh, France, they're good.
They're taking
they're
care of
fine.
already.
I mean, you got some of your best theologians coming out of France
Sure,
or in history, and I'm sure you got these huge cathedrals, and
Right.
I'm sure that everybody there is a strong, believing Christian,
Right.
And so,
Or at least has heard or has an opportunity to hear. Right.
if anything, France should be sending their missionaries to here, right?
Right.
Okay, but that's maybe not the case. Sometimes perception. Okay, so when you look at France, wow, they got quite a church history. And, okay, so being sent as a missionary to France, did you find that everybody there's got a halo over their head? Or a strong Christian, that everybody's attending church, everybody's growing in their faith?
Right.
How would you describe France as far as, as far as a nation, as far as the health of the church there?
Sure. The spiritual climate in France, it was in college that I first heard France is an unreached people group. I mean, and you have to break that term down. What does that even mean? So they look at statistics and you can come up with that term, but effectively, a few things that I would say pointed out are, in 1950, about 80% of the population attended church regularly.
In France?
In France,
Okay.
80% in 1950. Today, it's more like 5%. So that right there should tell you that it isn't what we all thought it was.
That's quite a drastic change from, you say, 1950 until now. So you're looking at just a little over 60 years there. I mean, like a generation.
A couple generations. But, a living example of that would be one of my coworkers, who's French, and he was baptized by his parents, who were just trying to please his grandparents. So as you kind of look at the narrative there, you see maybe his grandparents were involved and went regularly and were, I don't know if you want to say devout or what, but they certainly were involved, to, as folks who maybe didn't go as often, or maybe not at all, or whatever, and he never went. So, except for that one time that he got sprinkled on, and that was his last involvement in church until he was, well into his 20s when he had a chance to actually hear the gospel. So, yeah, I would typify France as a spiritually dark place. I didn't want to believe the statistics when I first heard them. Because I had stuck in my head, as you just described, the idea that, the history is so rich, the cathedrals are so large and magnificent. Certainly this is a place that, certainly it has God at the forefront of their minds, but no, what they have is a history, and that's really all they've got, is a history of Christianity there. I think it takes, and I think this serves as a bit of a warning to any nation that believes that it's comfortably seated in its faith. That all it takes is a generation or two to fail to pass on their faith to the next generation before we find ourselves wondering what happened and looking at our history.
So what you just said, Trent, is that we are one generation from really kind of losing it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the concern with a lot of Christians in the United States, is that, it's just like you described. You got a generation that's very faithful, and then all of a sudden the next generation doesn't take it so seriously, and then pretty soon the next generation, they're completely out the door, and they don't even know, basically the ABCs of the faith.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'll talk to people who are maybe college age, and they don't know who Jesus is. Or they'll ask, does he play soccer? Or, what religion is that, again?
So you don't even have really a whole lot, just to grapple with.
No, you're starting from a different spot that you are with the young people here in the U.S. The culture is different in that way. And I would add that the differences in culture and the differences in their history mean that whatever might happen here in the States, it's going to look different than it did there. I mean, they've got their own reasons for where they're at right now. One of them being that really your faith in France is seen not just as a personal thing, but a private thing. And so when you say that my faith is more than just something that I believe for myself, but that I think I shouldn't share with anyone else, you're kind of walking away from the teachings in Christ. He said that that the message will be preached, the gospel will go, the kingdom will be preached to the ends of the earth, and it starts right here where you are and moves out from there. When you say, no, I'm just going to keep it to myself, when the Christians shut their mouths, that's kind of where things get to where they're at right now. And so it's a daily kind of a retraining or exciting this generation there to open their mouths again, to talk with their friends about their faith, to say that this is personal, but it can be personal for you too, not just private. So I think that kind of where they're at.
Yeah, so you mentioned you're looking at a nation that has such a rich Christian history, but now it almost now needs to be converted to Christianity again.
Right. About 1% of the population follow Christ. There's another statistic. How they get that number, that's for their surveyors to find out. But
give or take a little bit there.
Give or take, it's not the 25% or so that we see here.
Yeah.
And so, really, to make an impact on a population as a whole or on a culture, you need more like 2%. And so in France, you're not seen as a general part of the culture. When the Christian church does something, not everyone notices. And so it really comes down to person by person, one at a time, one relationship at a time. How are you going to multiply your faith into the next person? How are you going to share with them the saving grace that you found in Jesus? So that reconverted idea is kind of interesting. Their understanding of Christianity is what they learned from their history books, and their history books don't tell them anything about the faith, just the actions of a group of people who called themselves Christians. So you are starting with a new education, and it has to happen through testimony. It has to happen through real people living their lives out in front of others, and saying not just, well, let me prove to you why God is real, but let me tell you what He's done in my life. The fact of the testimony is something that cannot be refuted. It is a fact. It's something that's happened to me. It's something that a work that God's done in my life, and He can do the same for you. That's the kind of ministry that is taking place in France, and is the kind of one-to-one ministry that Paul lays out for Timothy. In 2 Timothy 2:2, he says, "The things that you've heard me teach in front of many witnesses, teach also to reliable men who will be able to teach others." So you see 4 generations of, now I've taught these people, and you teach them, and they'll teach others. So that chain that we see went silent needs to wake up again. That's what we're seeing in France.
Yeah, so it's a lot of just saying, well, we're not here to argue with you, as we are here just to give our testimony to say, well, God is real. And this is how God has been working in my life, or these are the changes that we are seeing. And if you receive Jesus and have a relationship with Him, that you too will see your life change in some real, or see God working in some very special ways. Okay, so and you mentioned approximately 1% of the people are really actively engaged in having a relationship with Jesus Christ. But then you also mentioned that France is kind of dark, and so when you think of dark, how would you describe dark there?
Sure. Well, one outward sign of it is just a widespread depression. France they consume more antidepressants than any other nation in the world. They'll agree with you. The French themselves are constantly talking in their newspapers about, are we depressed? How depressed are we? We're really depressed. And they all agree. It's really, it's strange to see, but...
it's not just weather related.
No. They have some nice weather, depending on the region, but
it's just depression. And
it's this thing where, all this opulence and this wealth that we have is really not fulfilling us. And we can try the next thing to please ourselves and to try to fill this hole, this emptiness that we're feeling, and you can name whatever diversion you want, but it ultimately comes up lacking, because it's only God, only that relationship with our Lord that can fill that can bring wholeness to a person's life, and so you'll see suicide is a real problem in France. And we can tell you stories about people who have been to that point and said and cried out, Lord, if you're a real thing, if God exists or something like that, you better show me, or this whole thing is just not worth living. And so I see that as kind of the one way to look at it, the darkness that we feel there. Another is just a real resistance to the gospel culturally. the idea of the existence of God in their minds is settled, and that there is no God. We invented him. We needed him for explaining things that scared us at night, and we needed him to keep people in line. But now we have government, now we have science, we don't need God anymore, so we got rid of it. And no one ever really believed it anyway, they would tell you. I've had conversations with college-age students about this, and that's their feeling on it. But yeah, and so when you talk to them and you say that I believe that there's a God and I think he likes us, that doesn't register with them. They think you must be uneducated. You must be somehow backwards. How can you be I thought America had schools. I thought you were an IT guy. I thought you had a thinking brain, and now you've turned it off to believe in something so backwards. And so it's really a lack of. They've been told their entire lives that there is no such thing as God, that there is nothing beyond you and I. It's humans are the only thing that can make this world any better, and all we have is each other. And when we die, that's the end of the whole story. So that's just some serious hopelessness right there. And it's no wonder that people there are depressed when they try thing after thing to make themselves happy, and they come up empty. So I think that's from my experience. I certainly don't know the whole story of every single of the 60 million plus people there, but that's been my experience on the one-to-one basis.
Striving to find inner joy and peace and love that only God can give through things like affluence and intellect. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, you have a lot of depressed people, a lot of searching people.
Sure.
And like, for instance, is there a presence of, like, for instance, the occult, like Satan kinds of stuff, or doesn't that?
Sure. And that's kind of paradoxical, which the French love a paradox, and one of them is this: they say that there's no such thing as a spiritual realm, or most people don't believe in one, but at the same time, the occult is running rampant there. There's more full-time workers of the occult, we're talking psychics and mediums, than there are Christian workers in France. And so I find that kind of odd. They're still searching, just like you and I. Culture does not make them not human. We still have these basic needs. We still have these basic questions built into us. We have a knowledge somehow that there is something higher than ourselves. But when you've already been told that you can't search for it in God, you're going to look somewhere else. And that's what we're seeing happening there.
Because God created us innately that way, that we do have a hunger and a thirst, and that every human is going to have these questions and desires. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're looking at a people that for the most part are affluent, for the most part are highly intelligent, and God is just something of the past, that maybe kind of met the needs of people in some fairy tale age, so to speak, of history. Okay, so how do you go about ministering to people like this? I mean, you look at different nations and the challenges of going to this nation versus that nation as far as ministering to people, and obviously France, it's got its big challenge there, it sounds. So how do you go about it?
Well, we've got a number of different ministries that focus on all levels of society. And so if you're talking about, college ministry, that's going to be a lot of personal interactions, the parties with, inviting students to come to events and things like that. It's going to be, we have athletic ministries that reach out to people to put on a soccer clinic or something like that, and have athletes, many times pretty well-known athletes, share their faith story. And so you can go from the personal one-on-one to the large group to something like, what I'm mostly involved in, and that's kind of the digital age, the widespread idea, because really the French people won't walk into a church if they're looking for their answers about God. Because like we said, we agree they have questions, and it's evident, but they're not going to just walk into a church, because for one thing, it might be empty, one of those buildings. Second, they might show up to an event or come to a small group meeting or something like that if they're invited, if they know someone personally. But when less than 1% of the people follow Christ, most French don't know a Christian to even talk to them about God. But they will Google their question. They will go online and search, who is Jesus, or what is God, or what is the meaning of life, or that sort of thing. And we want them to find the truth. And so one of the things that my technology team that I'm on has been doing is hosting and developing these websites to answer that question, because we want to see more and more people hear the gospel for themselves, and then from there give them an opportunity to meet believers in their area and come into community with them. And so it's going to be one at a time. The personal relationship has never been more important than it is today. technology is not replacing personal communication and personal relationship, but it is enabling us to put people into contact with believers. And so if you could imagine, you know, you have people that you work with, and you'd like to see them come to Christ, but you don't know when they're ready, and so you can continue to witness to them. But what if there were people who were ready and they had questions, and they maybe had said, you know, I want to believe this, and they could just email you and say, you know, Jeff, can we talk about this? That's the kind of tools and resources that we're trying to develop in France and around the world as well.
Sounds like it's multifaceted, but your area is pretty much, you know, working through, well, technology, the internet, and I know with so many things, you know, for whatever it is, if we have a question, we can Google it. Yeah. And then we get a lot of information, and so that's the whole thing, is that as people are searching, well, in the comfort of their own home, they can, you know, ask, who is Jesus? And your website comes up, and then you can direct them in a way that will, you know, help them to learn more about, about Jesus Christ. Yeah, so well, that's, you know, using the innovative power of media and technology, the internet, and a way of reaching people that, you know, are at a certain level where they, you know, technology and trying to answer their questions and meet some of their spiritual needs.
Yeah, and I think for me the most important thing has been finding out that that I'm able to be used the way that God made me. You know, I'm kind of an introvert. I'm kind of a geek, if you will, and all the same, He wanted to use me. God doesn't, how I like to put it, I've tried to invent the phrase, but God doesn't call those who are qualified. He qualifies those He calls. And so you don't have to wait to be ready to go out and do His will. You just have to be willing, and He will prepare you. So, yeah.
Well, Trent, it's been so nice to have you here today. Very interesting, your work in France. And so, I don't know, I just ask God's blessings upon you and your ministry, and we should have a website up here too, that if any of you would want to support Trent's ministry, that there's an opportunity to do that as well. Well, God bless you, and thank you for watching this day.
Thanks.